Great. Okay. Well, friends, we have a very deep topic today. Arguably one of the deepest topics of all, I would say. Because with the world in the crisis that it is, and seemingly growing quite fast, I think we could say that one of the foundational reasons for that is exactly how much exile we are in collectively. And I'd actually like to begin with a kind of guided contemplation before I speak some thoughts about the topic. I'd like to guide us in a meditation and then to invite some contemplation with some questions, just to really open up the field of the topic. So, if you like to close your eyes, please do so. And if not, that's totally fine, of course. But either way, whether you have your eyes open or closed, I invite you to take your attention, not your thinking, but your attention inside and down into your body, and specifically to begin with, to your breathing. Which means simply, many of you will be very familiar with this, but those of you who are less familiar, which means simply to pay attention to the sensations arising in your body as you breathe in and as you breathe out. Movements, and then the more subtle sensations, of which there are many and constantly changing, moment by moment by moment, and just inviting not to stop thinking, because that's virtually impossible, but to take control of your attention. That is always possible. And choose to pay attention to the realm of physical sensations, and specifically your breathing. And then, if you are willing, to relax your out breath, to soften and naturally lengthen your out breath a little bit, which, if you choose to do so, will give you most likely a sense of settling more in your chair. You may open more contact with your physical base, your pelvis, in contact with the chair. And then also, as you continue to soften the out breath, to begin to sense your legs, your feet in connection with the floor. That may happen naturally, and if it doesn't, then just be with however it is for you. So we're just opening a sense of inner being, I could call it, inner sense of being here in your inner space. Just breathing, breathing, breathing. And the first question I invite for contemplation, when I say contemplation, I don't mean only to think about. That may be part of the process, but to see also how the question can land a little deeper than just in our thinking. So take the question in as much as you feel able or willing to do. And the first question I want to invite is, what is your relationship to intimacy? What is our experience of intimacy? Intimacy meaning closeness, connection, can be connection to our body, can be connection to our heart, can be connection to another person, can be connection to nature. This is what I mean by intimacy. And what are the moments in our lives, in your lives, when you most experience intimacy? And that doesn't necessarily mean with something happy and good. It just means something like a more naked connectedness with whatever is. And what's the quality of those experiences? Another question we might contemplate is, when do you feel most open and alive in your body? Like really connected in your body, senses open, feeling of energy in your body, feeling of aliveness. When do you have that experience? And obviously there are grades of that. It can be a little bit, it can be a lot. And what's your kind of baseline normal? If you would look at an average day or an average week, how much of the time do you experience that sense of deep aliveness in your body? Another form of intimacy, we might say, is intimacy with our heart, intimacy with all of our emotions, whether that be sadness, fear, joy, anger, the connection to which often leaves us feeling softer in our heart. How soft is our heart? How easily do we feel heart connection with people? And then we might also ask how often we feel intimate with something that's difficult to define, but something more other, like another realm of life. Some people would call it a sacred realm, realm of immanence. Some something like that. I'm not talking about religion, I'm not talking about belief. I'm speaking of direct experience. What are the moments when that kind of intimacy arises, if it does? Nothing to do with what we believe in or don't believe in. I speak of direct experience. And what are the portals for each of us through which intimacy arises? Whether that be physical, emotional, or through art, music, literature, whatever is you feel close to, exercise, nature. What are your portals into the realm of intimacy, openness, connection? How do they sit in your life? Are they central or are they more peripheral? And then just coming back to your breath, to your sitting, to your contact with your chair, with the ground. And then to have an awareness of the group that's here, all the people who are here from almost all over the world. All of us, in one way or another, yearning for more connection, for more intimacy, yearning for more heart connection. Now is it just to open your sensibility to that? Behind all the exteriors, the depth of that yearning. Can you embrace that in your heart? And with that in your mind or in your heart, in your body, in your consciousness, whenever you're ready, let's softly and gently open our eyes. Great, thank you. So I wanted to dive in that way into the whole field of this topic because I do see and I do believe, I do experience that in many respects we are very deeply collectively in a state of exile. And certainly when I start to work with a group of leaders, whether it's a group or whether it's one-to-one, I'm meeting an energy field that is in exile. Not because it's not good people, quite the contrary, but because that's what we've collectively normalized. We've collectively normalized a kind of numbness, a disconnection from the body, an exclusion and literal exiling of many of our emotions, and an excess of thinking, an excess of thinking. That which keeps us most in exile in many ways is the domination of thinking, because thinking has no direct experience of the world. And so long as we have no direct experience or very little direct experience of the world, we are by definition in a separation. And right at the core of exile is the whole topic of separation, separateness. Each of us in our bubble, our egoic identity, wrapped in our bubble, relating to other bubbles. And occasionally feeling suddenly the bubble opens and suddenly we feel this kind of deep connection. But that is not the norm, certainly not in the corporate world. That is not the norm at all. Many people work years with each other, hardly knowing anything about each other. It's quite extraordinary. So if I work with a team and we start, that starts to melt, and suddenly people are hearing very basic facts about each other, about children, about illnesses, about parents, and it's like a revelation, even though people have been working together for a long time. Such is this state of I'm in my bubble. I'm in my bubble, and it's a bubble dominated by thinking. It's not a bubble in which it's normal for me to feel you, to meet you, and to feel you. Because the moment we start to feel each other, we're already moving out of exile. Thinking is a useless navigational tool for moving out of exile or for doing deeper developmental work. We cannot think our way through that bubble. We have to work at a much more visceral level. And if we think we're thinking our way out of the bubble, we're just usually increasing the disconnection even more. So I think the word intimacy, when I've been contemplating this topic, is a very important word, because intimacy means I'm very close. I'm very close. I'm very connected, whether it's to myself, my body, my feelings, to you, to your interior, because that's our natural state. Our natural state is to feel each other. We're born into that. We're born into that natural openness. And in many different ways, that natural openness gets compromised because we're born into already broken ecosystems, already traumatized ecosystems, where the flow of connection is already compromised. Or, to put it at its most simple, the flow of love is already compromised. And our separateness is also a consequence of the breaking of the flow of love. The flow of love, not personal love. Love is a much deeper energetic reality. Love is a quality deep in our heart, which we all touch at moments. We all touch at moments. For what often randomly, we might wake up one day and suddenly feel more open. We meet people and we feel just naturally more open and generous and loving for no particular reason. That's what I mean by love. But it's fleeting often. It's fleeting. It's not necessarily our core experience. And I think it's very interesting then to look at the ways we do connect, whether that's often through exercise, where suddenly we feel more alive. We feel more alive. And often in a corporate group, I'll ask people to remember that, and everyone knows more or less how that feels. And then if I say, well, what percentage of each day do you feel alive in your body like that? Heads drop, because it's sort of 5%, 10%. And that's what we've normalized. It's so important to see what we've normalized. Because if we've normalized it, until we realize that we've normalized it, it's very difficult to move beyond it. We're just in it. It's like that's the way things are. Contact with nature, obviously, is a big thing for a lot of people. Walking, being in nature, music, art is a portal for many of us. Where we enter, our bubble opens, and we suddenly hear a piece of music and we find we're crying. Wow, suddenly our bubble opens and our emotional body starts to flow more. So already that's moving out of exile. Exile is this separation characterized by lack of intimacy, disconnection, and ultimately numbness, kind of relative numbness, which we realize when we experience the opposite, when we suddenly feel much more alive and much more connected. Substances is a way for many people. Substances, it's no coincidence that there is this whole movement of psychedelics. It's no coincidence. It's so desperately needed. And obviously, if you ingest psilocybin or MDMA or ayahuasca, you're going to have a very direct experience. You can't stop it. And that's craved by people. I met someone recently from California who runs leadership groups where they use psilocybin. That's a symptom. That's a symptom of that craving to have more direct experience, to break this bubble of thinking that keeps us in this exile, keeps us in this disconnection. I don't use psychedelics myself, but I know enough people who do to have a feeling of what the experience is, obviously. It's very strong and it's very direct. You can't avoid having a direct experience. And sometimes it's a great experience and sometimes it's very challenging because it puts you in touch with a lot of the domains of ourselves that we've pushed away, which we can speak more about. I think another fascinating area is sports. And I've done a lot of research in this, and there's actually a brilliant book. It was published in the 70s. I don't find it. And it was called In the Zone. I think it has a different title now. But it was written by the founder of Exile. And he spent a long time interviewing athletes, sports people in every domain. And he was interested to because he discovered very soon that many of them had highly mystical experiences, but they were frightened to talk about them because they were frightened of being thought crazy, or you know, they just never talked about them then. Maybe even now, I don't think it's so common. And the book is extraordinary. And one of the most standout moments is when he was talking to an Olympic weightlifter. And this weightlifter confided in him that there were certain moments when he was lifting very heavy weights where he saw pure light. And he said, this is why I do it. This is why I'm willing to go through all the pain and suffering of my sport for those moments of pure light. You will not have a higher mystical experience than that, because all the mystical traditions speak of pure light as being the core seed essence of reality. Light, pure light. And there are many meditative practices that guide people into an experience of seeing light. Some people see it more easily. I think I've seen pure light twice in my life, but I know enough to know that it's the seed element of reality. So the book is full of extraordinary stories in many, many fields. You'll hear when football players, soccer players talk about being in the zone, or basketball players, they will say, first of all, that they go out of normal time. So they feel they have all the time in the world. And they will also say, I know everything that's happening just like that. I have total awareness of everything. So this is a very high state of consciousness, and it's commonly talked about. But I think what's interesting is there's no bigger context for it. There's no understanding of, well, so what's really going on there? Apart from the fact that everyone wants that. And even now, top football teams are using neuroscientists who come in and put measuring devices on players and help them understand more consciously how they might enter that zone through certain movements or gestures. So everyone is craving that, A, because it feels so good, and B, because you perform best. But in our secular culture, there is no bigger picture of what's that really, what is the implication of that? We take that as some kind of exceptional experience, but supposing that's how we're actually hardwired to be, supposing if things were actually as they could be, it would be more exceptional not to be in that experience. It's only exceptional because we're normally in such an exile. And it's often occurred to me, I'm going to kind of bring in a few different thoughts on this. It's often occurred to me that just as for very good reasons, we collectively exiled religion, and certainly all the kind of more dogmatic parts of religion, it's often occurred to me that we threw the baby out with the bathwater. And what's the baby? And what happened to the baby? What happened to our innate, deep sense of connectedness to something, whatever we call it, whether we call it the intelligence of life, whether we call it the Tao, whether we call it the light, whether we call it God, but not as belief. Not as belief. Beliefs are very problematic. People kill each other for beliefs. I'm talking about direct experience. That's the baby we threw out. And there are many people talking about this. I had a wonderful dialogue recently with John Vervaeke, who some of you may know, who is very dedicated to what he calls the advent of the sacred. What does it mean? What would it mean now to bring back the sacred, but not in a dogmatic religious way. What is our modern possibility of directly experiencing that which we give the name sacred to, not as belief, but as experience? So I want to, once again, because some of you will have heard me speak about this before, but I want to really highlight something that I believe is just so important in all of this. Because there are basically two kinds of developmental work, even what we might loosely call spiritual work. I don't much use that term. But they're very different because one is directed towards transcendence and basically is directed in a framework of all of the light, which is the core seed of reality. All of the light is up there. And therefore, we need to practice as much as possible. And there are many practices that take us into a more transcendent realm. A lot of spiritual practice is devoted to that. And that whole movement basically says down here is not really that important. And our basic job is to transcend here. But there is a whole other stream that says something very different and that actually says, why would we be here if we're supposed to get out of it? Like, why would we have a body if the idea is to get out of it? There is another movement that's quite different that says half of the light is up there and the other half is right down here and is actually in the areas that we call really dark in ourselves. I know this to be 100% true from my experience. I know this is true, which is why that path advocates two pillars, an upward pillar and a downward pillar in our developmental work. And when I work with leaders, this is the core part of the work. Because the downward, by the way, is obviously much more difficult. It's much easier to ascend because we suddenly feel really good. Everything is one. Everything is peaceful. Yeah, but it's also an avoidance of what's here. Because when we do the down work, and that needs very careful guidance. It needs groups who are dedicated to that and very skillful guidance. We need to meet all those parts of us that we have exiled and had to exile. Hurts, wounds, terrors, deep feelings of abandonment and isolation that we are all carrying without exception. I have not ever worked with a single leader who, when they were ready to really look down into themselves, did not contact deep layers of isolation, shame, worthlessness. Even the most apparently confident leaders, successful leaders, carrying those layers inside. And there is no thinking our way through those. There is no psychologizing our way through those. The only way those layers, yeah, spiritual bypassing, whoever wrote that, thank you, Sandra. That's the way up. It's really in danger of spiritual bypassing. The only way through those layers is to be willing finally to sit right in the center of them. Held in a big heart space that says, let's really welcome. Let's welcome for a moment. Let's welcome with our hearts. Let's welcome that core feeling you carry of worthlessness. let's sit right in the center of that shame together. Let's meet it with all our heart. Let's sit right in the center of that feeling of total isolation. Do you know how many people carry that inside? How many people? I heard it said recently that, okay, we had a pandemic of COVID, but the real pandemic is isolation. In the middle of all this talk of connectivity, really deep down, in many ways, there's never been more isolation. That's the work here, because once we do that, those deep layers that we call dark, they do transmute, they do alchemize. They do alchemize. They alchemize into the light of the heart. And for us to be coherent, and if we turn towards the topic of leadership, for a leader to be coherent, to have an energy field and a transmission into the world that is coherent, that has to be a core part of their inner development. And as I look around, I don't see many people doing that because it takes a lot for someone to be ready, and it takes skillful guidance. It starts even on a very simple level with just being willing in a team to acknowledge how we're actually feeling, how we're really feeling without any need to fix it, just to hear how is everyone really feeling, because most people are anxious, pretty understandably. And a team that is not allowed to say that will have a very low ceiling of energy and very low ceiling of connection. And the only reason people would not be allowed to say that is because the leader doesn't meet that in themselves. And so definitely doesn't want to hear people saying, actually, I feel really, really quite frightened at the moment and very stressed by what's happening. So that's really the first layer. But then in a leader who wants to go deep into their own healing and awakening has to have a space, whether it's with a coach or whether it's at a retreat where that is the aim. Part of the aim is to dive into those layers, like when we run leader as healer retreats, that's part of the work. It's an essential part of the work to make it safe enough to finally bring those parts out of exile. You see, they are in exile. Those parts of us are in exile. So how can we possibly be fully out of exile when we are exiling parts of ourselves? This is the part of the deep inner work that's needed, badly, urgently needed. Because as we do that, and first of all, whole parts of our energy come online, and therefore whole parts of our intelligence, because life energy is essentially intelligent, but also our hearts come online more. That's why I say any leader who cannot cry easily should not be allowed to be in leadership. And I had a beautiful message the other day from a very senior leadership professor who's known my work for a long time and actually sat in on many of my sessions as an observer. And he said, I've heard that you say that so many times. And because of events in his life, just recently the floodgates opened. And he said, I cried for the first time in decades. And it's incredible. Now I understand why you say that. Anyone who cannot cry easily should not be allowed anywhere near leadership because your heart is numb. And it's interesting when I say that at like a business school where I work. I remember a Saudi man standing up saying, so why should I cry? Tell me, why should I cry? Okay, well, let's talk about it. And then let's get to day two, and probably you might find you're crying because you have a lot of hurt stored inside you, and you've developed a very strong mask around that. And you've learned that that's the way to survive and that's the way to prosper. But it's also a way to have a deeply unhappy life. Um, and it's said, and I love the sentence, I'm not sure where it comes from. I think it might be from the Sufi tradition, that the longest road we will ever walk is the road from our head to our heart. That's an amazing sentence. The longest road you will ever walk is the road from your head to your heart. And so what we're talking about as well when we really speak about coming out of exile, we're also talking about a melting of our egoic identity. We're talking about a melting of our whole experience of being a separate self in our little bubble with the world out there and people out there. We're talking about living little by little in a completely different connectedness to the world. Completely different connectedness, which has no end in its depth. No end in its depth. And when lastly, if we turn to the topic of what I referred to in the title of this webinar, which if I ever write another book, the thought of which slightly appalls me, might be the title, To Be a Blessing, the Highest Calling of Leadership. Why do I say that? Why do I say that? Because what does that mean? What does it mean to be a blessing? Well, I think one very simple way to get what this means is just think about those days where, for whatever reason, it might be because something great is happening in your life and you feel great, and you notice that you have this very open, generous attitude to people, right? Could be a taxi driver, could be a bus person, it could be a supermarket cashier. And you just notice that you talk and you naturally make connection, right? I think most people have some moments of that. That's in beginning to be in that territory. Because after an interaction like that, you feel better. But also, I've had many conversations with taxi drivers in London, at the end of which we say, thank you. Wow, thank you for that conversation. It's because I've been open and I've been naturally curious and naturally interested in their experience. And they've told me about their life. They've told me about their problems. They've told me about their inspirations. Because in that moment, I have carried that openness. That's the definition of being a blessing. Because you're giving someone a space of being really listened to, and that you are really interested in them, really interested in them, and that they feel felt. They feel felt by you. So when I speak of that being the highest calling of leadership, I'm talking about leader as healer, who is committed to a lifelong path of inner development in the understanding that the only way that becomes more baseline and increases is by doing that inner work of integration. Because otherwise that will be fleeting. I'll feel like that some days and I'll mostly not feel like that. Because there are still whole parts of me that are in exile. So my whole energy field cannot yet sustain that frequency, because that is a frequency. It's a vibration. It's a transmission into the world. So in that sense, I'm talking about leaders who are a blessing. I'm also always referring to the fact that it's a game changer for leaders when they realize that instead of looking all the time at the problems that need to be solved out there, if they will take their primary work as being inner work, awakening and integrating healing work, the whole way they approach out there naturally goes through huge upgrade. Huge upgrade. The whole perspective of this thing out there. Because in that we understand that reality is fundamentally subjective. It's fundamentally subjective. There's no objective out there. There are events that happen, but our experience of them is entirely subjective and entirely dependent on our frequency. Entirely dependent on our frequency. One of the things I'll never ever forget is reading once about a Tibetan monk who'd been imprisoned and tortured for 10 years by the Chinese. And when he was freed, he was interviewed. And during the interview, he said, "There were times when I was in great danger." And the interviewer said, you mean for your life? And he said, no, 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 no. There were times when I was in great danger of losing my compassion for the Chinese. Wow. Wow. And in this time, when there is what looks like so much darkness outside, whether we're leaders or not, I think this is more important than ever. I do think we need to be heartbroken sometimes. I do think we need to look at the news and be heartbroken. Maybe even feel despair sometimes. But that cannot become our dominant response. And if it does, if it becomes our dominant response, it's not because of what's happening out there. It's because that is triggering parts of us that are calling to be integrated. And it's very easy to say, well, I feel so terrible because of what's happening and blah, 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 and it's getting worse. It's getting worse. But we need to be very clear about what that is triggering in us. Otherwise, we lose any agency and we lose any capacity to be an agent of transformation in the world. We do need to feel heartbroken. We do need to feel despair when it arises. And we need to keep attending to those deeper parts of us that are constantly getting triggered until they're integrated. So the highest calling of leadership is the leader who is committed to their inner work of awakening and integration, so that their baseline becomes a transmission. And it's not a transmission of, oh, I'm always feeling good and blah, 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 and, I'm positive. No, 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 I'm not talking about being positive. I'm talking about something much, much deeper. Your core vibration, your core frequency. And what does it mean to be totally committed to that being your primary focus, so that you are a transmission in the world as much as possible? You are a blessing to whomever you meet. So, I feel like pausing and seeing what comes to you, seeing what comes to you. And if anyone would like to speak or ask a question or share a reflection, please do so. You can raise your hand electronically because there's quite a few pages. I won't see everyone. How is all this sitting with you, what I've been saying? Michael. Hello, Michael. You need to unmute yourself. Just unmute yourself. Yeah.
Nicholas, good morning. You are fast becoming a portal for whole self-intelligence on my part. If I could just give you some background, I came into contact with you and your teaching through initial contact with Thomas Hubel,
Mm.
and my recent readings with Ian McGilchrist
Mm.
show that you coincide with him
Yeah.
with regard to the narrow bandwidth. Except in the case of both of the other two gentlemen, I'm reminded of Democritus's comment that there is a distinction between know about and know how. When I'm listening to you, I feel I'm gaining know how
Mm.
because your own trajectory is ample evidence of having followed one path, found that you needed to go in another direction, reasons you didn't even know yet.
Mm.
Am I right? Your
Uh,
instinct took you on a path that has led you to where you are now,
yeah.
which is, I think, is probably the same for all of us if we have the capacity for self-awareness, which I'm sure all of us do, which is why we're here. You
Well,
are,
let's say I spent many years fervently hoping that if I meditated enough, I wouldn't have to face everything else inside myself. That I was fully signed up to until I
well, I
met
wish,
various people who made it abundantly clear to me that that was never going to work. And
my
then
only regret,
it's an ongoing journey, the inner work. It's
yeah,
forever because the layers of that storehouse inside, sometimes I'm calling it now like the bottom of the barrel inside.
yes.
It's never, will never be fully finished. But each time we find the way to go deeper and touch a deeper level inside of us, whether that's shame or worthlessness, there's a liberation inside.
I've also found that David Hawkins and his map of consciousness was quite useful in clarifying certain aspects of that.
I don't know.
What I find with you is that your statements are based on experience.
Yeah.
You are doing this with people who probably start with a lot of resistance.
Hmm.
You are an expert in identifying the source of that resistance, which is basically fear,
Hmm.
and of bypassing that fear and
Mm.
helping them to overcome it. My only regret is I wish I'd known you 50 years ago. I feel rather like the German saying, too soon old, too late smart.
It's
But
never, Michael, it's never ever too late.
I know, I know.
It's really never ever too late. And we
Well,
can,
when
it's
I
a
hear you,
narrative we can give ourselves, but it's never ever too late for anything.
when I hear you talking about talking to taxi drivers and supermarket checkout cashiers, it's something I do all the time.
Wonderful.
And with humor, knowing about their birth signs, knowing when they've picked up a name that is not theirs. So I'm well known as the gringo because I live in a Spanish-speaking country. And humorously, the other day, I came across a new cashier called Jasmine. My first response was to say, you must smell very nice at night. When I told my granddaughter that, she said, Tata, which is her grandfather, you will be accused of sexual harassment, which horrified me.
Mm. Well,
And
it's lovely to hear my,
Jasmine smells nice at night,
yeah.
the plant.
Mm. Well, you see, you're embodying a whole part of what I've been talking about. So it's wonderful to hear that. Thank you.
I get it, and I will be following you. I will read your book even. I meant to read Ian McGilchrist's tome, The Matter of Things.
Yeah.
As he humorously said recently, somebody misspelt the word tome and put it as tomb. And his comment was it felt like I was going in that direction. The 1,400-page book.
Well, I can tell you from my experience, I've only read the last chapter, which is a book in itself. I believe it's called The Sense of the Sacred, and the whole thing is worth it for that chapter alone. Yeah. Thank you, Michael.
You're very welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Emma.
Hi, Nicholas. Hi, everybody. You asked us to share what resonated, and so my mind did a very quick backtrack to something that you said towards the end. So feeling despair, really feeling the despair, what's going on in the world, climate, and so on, but not getting stuck in it. Yes, 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 all of that. Can you say more about if we get stuck in it, it's our exiled parts? Because my tactic right now is, okay, I know, I go back up into my head, I know I lose my agency if I get stuck there. So I use practices to get me back out of it. But I'd love to hear more about the mechanism that you're talking about it being exiled.
Right. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. That's such a precise and important question. So what I'm advocating and practice and train coaches to do. So if we were working together, I would invite you to do the opposite of trying to get out of it. And I would say, is it possible? And is it possible? It's a genuine question. Do you feel that together we could make it okay for you to have no opposition to that feeling? That's important because you see, any opposition, we're already in separation and therefore exile. Is it possible that we could explore what it would be like for you to literally take your seat right at the center of that despair? And then we see what would happen. And then we might feel that what it's like kind of it feels like going to the bottom of the barrel, as it were. And then something happens inside. You can maybe already feel it, right, in your body. A transmutation starts to happen because we literally love and welcome that finally. That exile part is finally brought back into our hearts. And there are just no words that capture enough the depth and power of that. Thank you. I know we can feel what I'm saying. These are the core parts of the depth of that kind of storehouse inside. It's all to do with feelings like shame, worthlessness, despair, isolation, because those are all experiences of non-love. The core issue, in a way, is love and how we got separated from the flow of love. And the only way we reconnect with that flow in that domain is to really experience the disconnect and the feelings that are sitting deep inside us. Deborah. Hi, Deborah.
Hi. I have a confession. And my body is shaking.
Take your time. Take your time, Deborah. Take your time.
On today's call, I totally felt the sharpness of isolation.
Mm.
And what comes up right now is grief.
Yeah, right.
And grief, and I love Joan Halifax's definition of grief, is that it is love that has nowhere to go.
Mm.
And my grief at this moment in relation to isolation, I feel so alone in my little office,
Right.
in my little Zoom calls, in
Yes.
my little, I'm alone, totally feeling what you're saying, like feeling to the core,
Right.
feeling like I'm walking this path alone, and and I'm like, no. And I look at my surrounding, and everybody is in their head, and everybody is in their thinking. And it's like, okay, is this my path to walk now, to totally embody that, but not in a fighter warrior way, but more in a openness kind of thing? Because I feel, and my grief, I feel every time I do not take the step, and sometimes I don't know where to take the step, and sometimes I don't know who my people are. Sometimes I feel very far. Every time I don't take this step, I feel my light dimming. And I know in my core that I am a carrier of light, and I mean that in the most humility. I'm not nobody special. I've just been in this conversation for the greater part of my life, for at least 45 years of my life. So there's like, how can we continue to walk each other home? How can I, oh my God, physically, it's just crazy what's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I'm doing a lot of breath work, and it's like tetany. So I know there's stuff, and I'm glad that I dared to speak.
me too.
But
Me
Paul
too.
is like, damn, how could we hold hands?
Well,
How
let me just let me ask something, Deborah. Thank you. I'm also very glad you dare to bring this. I just want to ask and look for a moment on screen. How many people here can recognize that at least in some part of you, there is a deep feeling of isolation and loneliness? Just raise your hand.
Yeah.
Okay, now just have a look at that, Deborah. Yeah? Take a breath. Take that in. Take that in. You're speaking for everybody. Take that in. Take that in. We're with you. I hold you in my heart as you speak, really. And I share that feeling with you. Take that in. Yeah. Breathe that in. Mm. Mm.
Oh God.
Mm. So what we see already is that one of the most important things of all is that we share and that we meet in this nakedness. So you bring a real gift by sharing yourself in this way. How are you now?
I just feel a lot of energy,
Mm.
very like this,
Mm.
a lot of energy, feeling it in my arms and my hands.
Mm. Mm. Just keep breathing and stay in contact with all of us.
And I welcome it totally, totally, totally,
Mm.
totally.
Mm. Mm.
Mm.
Mm.
There's a calmness now.
Yeah, I can feel that. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. You feel more settled in your base now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
strong.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Just relax the out breath. Yeah. Mm.
It's like a clarity that it's not clear. That's so strange, but it's just that inner knowing of, and I suppose the invitation that I'm feeling is just to trust.
Mm.
I don't need to know.
Mm.
No.
Well, there's a huge difference between a clarity of being and a clarity of thinking.
Yeah.
And we're very addicted to thinking that we have to have a clarity of thinking. But what you've been doing now is a big welcoming of this whole deep layer of yourself. And that brings you into a clarity of being. It doesn't matter if the mind makes sense of it yet. It really, really doesn't matter.
And there's an invitation that I no longer want to walk this path alone.
Good. Absolutely. Yeah.
I've made that, that was a pride in myself to say, I got this.
Okay. Okay. This is really great because you see the wisdom that's coming now. Yeah. So first of all, that you just said is exactly part of the exile. This kind of thing about, well, I should be resilient and able to handle everything on my own. That's part of the catastrophe we're in. It's we have to share. We have to share. We have to walk this together.
Totally.
We
And the
have to.
Stockholm syndrome that I've been living is that people say, no, you're okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
You
But
don't need help.
that's part of the collective numbing.
Yeah, no
It's
more.
it's part of the egoic identity. I should be able to manage all this on my own.
Mm.
We need to be together. We need to share our inspirations, our highest creativity, and our deepest pain.
Yes.
That's the path home.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Jeanette. And then Lisa.
Hi, Nicholas, and thank you, Deborah. That was a beautiful shared experience. And thank you for having the courage to lead us into that. I have a lot of different questions, so I'm going to try to sort of put them together into one that makes sense. I feel that there is this balance between a lot of conversation in our world, which is welcomed in terms of the trauma that everyone somewhere has gone through, and yet everyone feels that their trauma is their own. And so I think that's a lot of what the psychedelics are helping people dive into, but yet there's also a very separate experience in that. And there's part of that that's isolating, and there's part of that that's heart opening. And it feels like there's another bridge needed to move the conversation forward into the shared human experience versus the individual trauma that we're sort of
100%.
flourishing. So
Yeah.
I'm curious if you can speak more to that.
No, I'm 100% in agreement with that. And that's what happens naturally when we do this kind of process together more. Absolutely. There is no, in the end, there is no purely individual experience. I couldn't agree more. And that opens naturally. Even we saw there that this theme of isolation, almost all of us feel that.
Yeah.
It's not an individual experience. And that's very powerful and very important, I agree. Otherwise, the risk is I get even more into my separateness and I'm just dealing with my issues. It's not like that at all.
Yeah, there's such a shared human experience in this that is almost missing in some.
Yeah, absolutely. When I do, longer programs with leaders, and the vulnerability really opens, one of the biggest kinds of illuminations that people go through is, wow, so I'm not the only one suffering. I'm not the only one who's carrying grief. I'm not the only one who's carrying fear. And that in itself is a kind of huge relief and connecting, because in the isolated bubble, I'm supposed to be okay. And, especially as a leader, I'm supposed to be the one who has it all together. That's a recipe for an incoherent culture. That's why I speak about robust vulnerability as a core attribute of a good leader. Yeah. A leader who can show their vulnerability, but with a kind of robustness that makes it safe for people. Not that, oh my God, the leader's falling apart. No, she or he is showing their heart.
Yeah, that's the confusion of this whole vulnerability conversation, right? It's between, authenticity and vulnerability. It's gotten all the labels on it instead of that true sort of version of presence that it really is.
Exactly.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Yeah, thank you, Jeanette. Hi, Alexandra.
Hello there. So awesome to see you. So by now it's been about a couple of years since I had the privilege of working with you and you taking me to that very depth of shame, of worthlessness, of desperation. And the experience of pure love on the other side of that has made me much more courageous in working with leaders and asking questions I wouldn't have dreamt of asking before. And with that openness and courage, if you will, the ability to lead them to their own heart has increased tremendously, but not as pervasive, if you will. There are some people I cannot reach, and it saddens me so deeply because I can see the amazing people they are, and they don't see it.
Mm.
They're so deeply afraid that I can't get them to see what I see. I don't have a
Okay.
question.
No, just, yeah.
ah, ah,
So may I give you some reflection?
pardon me?
May I give you some reflection?
Please, please, yes.
So two things. Firstly, there are a whole number of people who simply have a no. And you will never probably get through to them.
Wow, you mean
You
you
did-
couldn't get to them either?
No, there are some people who just have a no.
Okay, all right.
And that's totally okay. It's totally okay. So, which brings me to my second point, which is the sadness you feel at that is yours.
Yes,
And there is
yes.
another layer of perhaps to explore in you of diving into that sadness. What lies at the bottom of that sadness? Because your response to that is yours.
Mm.
My response to that is, well, I'm sorry that's like that. I see that you have a no, so I love you, and that's fine. I'm not going to be
Okay.
overly entangled with that. But there's a way you get entangled with that suggests that there's,
Yes.
just some.
Damn it, always more, as you say.
Of
Always more.
course, there is always more. There is always more.
Yeah.
I recently went through as a participant in a program where I touched whole new levels of shame in myself. There's always more. There's
Okay.
always more. But that's a signal, you see, that your
No, you're
response
right.
to that is a very clear sign
No,
that
you're
there's
100%.
something more in that domain of your sadness, that it would be liberating for you to unfold, because otherwise you're going to be too much affected by it.
Yeah.
And that blurs you. That already
It
blurs
does.
it already blurs your screen,
Mhm.
because it triggers something in you.
Right.
It triggers a level of sadness that is more than what's warranted in that situation. You're just meeting someone who's not ready.
Okay. All right. Gee, that's easy.
But
Got
it's
it.
important, though. It's important.
Oh, you're right. I'll schedule time with my teacher.
Very good. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Hmm. Good. So if no one has anything more, let's just go quiet for a moment and just conclude with another little meditation process together, and just to settle inside. Because there was quite a lot of energetic opening in our being together. Just come back to your body and notice what's happening in your body and your nervous system and notice also the collective field of the group. We didn't just have an intellectual conversation. We touched each other. We reminded ourselves that to meet in our so-called vulnerability is to meet in a way that enriches our heart, and therefore takes us a step out of exile. And just to breathe. Relax the out breath. To feel our shared humanity. And to feel the softening in our hearts, our individual and our collective heart together. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for this time together. Thank you very, very much.